I'm bored. Let's read a book. Oh! Pretty much in silence, we walked up a set of wide black stone stairs. The side walls were of the same black stone. All the stone was smooth but unpolished, and it seemed to absorb light with almost no reflection. Each stone was set so tightly into place that the mortar between each was less than half a fingertip in width. That thin line of mortar was black. So clean were the steps, they bore no trace of dust, although the light from the overhead skylights did not fall on the steps directly. Talon and Samuel were at the front of the group. I was at the back, just behind Rin and Crystal. From Crystal's blue leather belt, darker than her faded blue blouse and trousers, hung 2 sheaths, both containing knives, one barely a span in length. She wore a small matching blue pack. All this black, depressing, muttered Rin, shaking her head, her blonde hair fluffing out for an instant. She wore a brown pack like mine, except hers was stuffed to a bursting point and had several small bags tied to the outside. It smells like power, answered Crystal, touching her hand to the long black hair she had wound up into a bun after our rather late lunch. Then she emitted the faintest giggle. If only she didn't giggle, I shook my head. She was nearly a decade older than I was, at least with the hint of lines around her eyes, almost scrawny, except for her nicely formed breasts. Creepy, if you ask me, muttered Rin again. Her right hand rested awkwardly on the haft of a long-sheathed knife. At the top of the steps were a foyer of sorts, windowless, and on the far end a set of doors that Talon held open. The breeze blowing toward me held a hint of spring or rain, that clean smell that follows a good rain when the dust is washed out of the air. Yet I could see that the sky was as blue and nearly cloudless when I had walked under the gates and into Nylon at midday. Gather round. So we gathered. I gave Merton a wide berth, smooth voice or nod. He looked like he'd steal anything available, just to prove he could. Dorothy didn't have that problem. She practically cuddled up next to him. I stood a pace or so behind Rin and Crystal, facing Talon. Right ahead of us are the transients' quarters, where you will be staying. Each of you will have a separate room, explained Talon. You can sleep there or with anyone else in your group, as you please, but only with that other person's consent. Forcing yourself on someone else is a good way to immediate exile. Now, it's that way, complained Dorothy. Merton sniffed. Rin grinned as if no one were about to force her. A thought which I certainly agreed, wondering absently if, with her, I might need that protection. I glanced around to find Tamara looking at me. She nodded once, then transferred her attention back to Talon, who had continued droning on. Had she understood what I had been thinking? How? Washrooms and showers are at the end of the hallway. A small building on the other side of the square garden with the fruit trees is the dining hall where your meals will be served. You may eat there, or you may pay for meals anywhere in Nylon. The choice, again, is yours. He grinned broadly. But the Brotherhood's meals are good, and the price is right. Only your life, said Dorothy softly, but loud enough to stop Talon more intently. He frowned, then shook his head. Believe it or not, our interest is saving your lives, not spending them. He cleared his throat before continuing. Your introduction to the elements of the Danger Guild will start tomorrow after breakfast in the classroom building. That's the one with the red square by the doorway toward the harbor from the dining hall. Now I'll show you to your rooms. If you wish to trade a room with someone else, you certainly can, provided you both agree. Without another word, he turned and opened the black oak door, not even looking to see if any of us followed him. Of course, we all did. What else could we do? My room, like all the others, had a narrow bed, just wide enough for one comfortably. The wooden frame was, thankfully, of polished red oak. A single sheet covered the mattress, and a dark blue blanket was folded across the bottom of the bed. No pillows, not that I had slept with one since I had apprenticed with Uncle Sardet, and only a single small oil lamp on the table. There was no closet, but a square red oak wardrobe, half-hanging space and half-open shelves. A braided and multicolored oval rug, perhaps 3 cubits across, covered most of the blue floor tiles between the door and the bed, which was nearly against the outside stone wall. The half-open single casement window was in the middle of the wall, just short of a foot from the bed. I pulled my cloak from the pack and hung it up, as well as my single spare set of trousers and tunic. The order-locked purse was there with my apprentice wages, as was another purse I did not remember. I opened it. Inside were 10 more gold pennies. Worn, nothing more. I swallowed. For some reason I had trouble seeing it for a minute, perhaps because I had recalled the gold penny with the small clip out of it. My mother had remarked it as coming from the buyer from the Emperor of Hammer. She refused to let me see her tears, but left me what she could. I grasped back in the bag for something, anything. There was also a short-sleeved summer shirt, but I left it folded and put it on the second shelf. My leather case with the razor and soap I had put on the top shelf. The few other underclothes I had fit in with room to spare, as did the small book my father had clearly tucked into my back. The basis of order, of all things. Who knew? I figured reading it might be something to do, especially if training got boring. I didn't leave it out in the open, but tucked it under the shirt. The purses I put back in the pack, which I had folded and put on the top shelf. They would be safe, that I knew. I took 10 coppers and a silver penny. None of the rooms had locks, just bolts that could only be closed from inside. Then again, who was going to try to steal anything from the Brotherhood around? Even Merton would hesitate for now. I shook my head. The hour was early, and even if it were k's down to the harbor, a good walk, and even if my feet were blistered, I intended to try it, just to see if I could get a better idea about what Nyland really represented. And I didn't want to sit around and think about either the book or the extra purse. The staff stayed in the wardrobe along with the cloak. With a last look at the small room, I closed the door. Outside, the central hallway was empty, although I could hear voices in the neighboring room. Rin and Crystal. Their words were low. The pathway toward the harbor was easy enough to find, since there were stone pedals every 100 rods or so along each of the paths, with names and arrows pointing out the way. They read Harbor, 3 Ks, Northwest Depot, 2 Ks, Administration, 1 K. I kept following the arrows until I reached a black stone wall that ran north and south from one side of the peninsula to the other. It was low, a little over 2 cubits, nor was it really a barrier, since there were no gates at the openings where the paths went through it. On one side were the almost park-like grounds that had stretched for more than a K, with scattered low buildings. From where I stood at the top of the long set of wide steps, I could look over the central part of Nyland, or the commercial district, whatever it was called. Behind and over the building tops, I could see the blue harbor and the tops of several masts. Right beyond the wall, the ground fell away in a grassy slope that dropped a good 15 cubits in less than 100. On the other side of the downslope, the buildings began, all black stone, roofed in black slate. Each stood separately, set back from the black stone paved streets and shinier black curbs. Unlike Enstrom and Matral or even Wandernot, there were no hitching posts. Despite the width of the streets, they did not seem to be designed for horses or wagons. People walked the streets, some carrying packages, some carrying nothing, some in black, some in all colors of the rainbow. No one even looked up the hill, so I headed down. Halfway down, I looked back up. The wall that I had looked so low from the uphill side appeared at least 15 cubits high from the base of the hill, even accounting for more stone exposed on the downhill side. I didn't think the wall was nearly that high, but speculating on optical illusions wouldn't tell me any more about nylon. Once on the streets of the harbor area, everything felt more normal. People talked, and I could hear the babble of the market square ahead. With all the black stone, the city should have felt warmer, especially on a summer afternoon. But the breeze from the west was cool enough, apparently to keep the temperature comfortable. A sailor, red-haired and red-bearded, gave me a long glance as I entered the square. Half the booths, those on the north side, seemed permanent, workmanlike, and well-crafted. Those on the south side, some of which were no more than half tents or canvas-covered tables, seemed shoddy by comparison. Several seemed untended. I nodded. The outland traders and ships had their ware on the south side. "Young fellow, come to see the amber from Bristol? Fire diamonds from Afrit, here alone." Still, the calls from the hucksters were muted. Perhaps 30 shoppers filled the entire square, split among nearly as many vendors. Most of the shoppers were young, not much older than me. Danger Gelders, those doing duty with the Brotherhood. I guessed as I looked first at the booths on the north side of the square. The first displayed some ceramics. Good work, but nothing to compare to my mother's. The colors were too vivid. A man sat behind them, perched on a stool, who gave me a passing grin, as if to acknowledge I would buy nothing. In quick order, I passed some carved and gilded mirrors, a goldsmith's display of rings, necklaces, and pendants, smith's array of assorted steel tools, which seemed of high quality, leather goods, including purses, belts, packs, and sheaths from various sizes of knives. A bootmaker's display with several gaudy, if well-tooled, set of boots. At the woodworking stall I stopped, surveying the items on display. All were small, breadboards, book holders, and mostly card boxes. No furniture except a tiny pedestal table and 2 shelf bookcase of gray oak. "You know wood," observed the boy minding the display. His brown eyes were almost matched his brown hair, and he wore a tan shirt. "Some. You do any of these?" "Only the breadboards. My older brother did most of the rest, except the table and the shelves." "Your father?" "Mother. She sells on consignment to Hammer." The breadboards were adequate, as were the boxes, but I had been doing better when I had left Uncle Sardit. Only the pedestal table was clearly better than I could do. "You think you do better work?" asked the boy. "Doesn't matter now," I answered absently. Whatever I did from there on out, it wouldn't be woodwork. I left without saying more and walked across the square. The first cloth-draped table was the trader who had been screeching forth about amber. A single look told me that the amber was fair at best, and the silver settings in which Most of it was encased or worse. The trader glanced away from my scrutiny, not even speaking. The adjoining table was filled with uncut fire diamonds. Even from the spread stones, I could pick out 3 or 4 clearly superior to the others. Not bigger, just better. Displaying what I might have called more order. But I couldn't afford them. And there wasn't much point in bargaining over a lesser stone. Not when I would need funds more than diamonds before very long. Several tables were vacant, their canvas flapping in the breeze, barely held down by the stones. Further toward the corner closet to the harbor was a tiny man sitting behind half-dozen small and elaborately carved ivory figures. Those alone matched the quality of the crafts displayed on the north side of the square. For a long time I studied the figures. One, that of a young man carrying a dark staff, appealed to me. Once again, I passed without even trying to bargain. Nor did the trader or carver try to entreat me. From the square I walked down toward the 4 long wharves. Each gray stone structure rose out of the dark blue water of the harbor, more than 50 cubits, with a central paved roadway more than 10 cubits wide. At the first wharf, the one closest to the harbor mouth, and furthest from the center of the market area, was a huge twin-masted and steel-hulled steamer. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the forward funnel streamer. The ensign I did not recognize, but with the blue-green background on the golden crown, I would have guessed the ship was from somewhere in Nordla. A half-dozen loading carts, stacked with square wooden packing cases of different sizes, waited for the ship's crane to transfer each into an open forward hold. What was in the crates I couldn't see. I walked down toward the pier. Although there were small stone booths for guards, the booth, spotlessly clean, was empty. Nor was there a guard around. Click, click. My boots nearly skidded on the stone pavement underfoot. Ahead, steam drifted from the small tractor linked to the loading carts. Though they were long like farm carts, each nearly 10 cubits in length, the sides were of smooth milled red oak, held in place by steel brackets. "Stand clear, fellow," a woman I had not seen, wearing a set of black overalls, waved in my direction, then gestured towards the ship. Weep! The crane lifted 2 more crates, cradled in a heavy mesh net, up off to the next to last cart. The end cart was already empty. The woman walked briskly toward me, dark-haired. She was nearly as tall as I was, and broad in the shoulders. She smiled. "Must be new in Nyland. Danger Guild?" I had to nod. "We were loading furniture right now. The ship is the Empress, out of Brista, Nordla lines. I'm Karen." "Is this your Danger Guild?" I blurted. She laughed. "Not exactly. I started as a purser on the Brotherhood ships, but traveling got old. I liked dealing with cargo and making up shipments, handling the cube and stowing calculations. Whee! Excuse me." She was back at the cart, deftly jockeying 2 more crates into the net, without seeming to work up a sweat. Weep! As the net lifted away, Karen returned. "So that's how I ended up here. I have a small farm not too far from Sigil, in the low hills north of the high road. I spend my free time there." "But don't you need help loading all these ships?" "There are 4 of us. That's enough. We don't handle that much bulk anyway." The Economics don't work. Not against forced labor or slavery. Weep! As she turned back toward the loading, I frowned. For a glorified stevedore, Karen was unusually bright, and perfectly willing to talk to a total stranger. Was she another Brotherhood type, with quick and incomplete answers? In the direct sunlight, even though it was a shade cooler than normal for a late afternoon, I was beginning to sweat. After wiping my forehead with the back of my sleeve, I looked at the steam tractor. Magister Kerwin had taught us about the steam-powered machinery, how it created too much chaos unless properly designed and handled, and how it generated too much concentrated heat. Steamships could handle the heat because of the conductivity of the ocean and their relative isolation from other chaos sources. Weep! Another full net lifted away, and the Gregor's loadmaster, or whatever else she was, stepped back toward me. What do you think of Nylon? Don't know what to think. Just got here today. I pointed to the tractor. That seems contrary to the Magister's teaching. Karen grinned. She looked younger, say about Tamara's age when she smiled. It only seems that way. If you consider the alternatives in order theory, the number of bodies required to lift that cubage, it works out about even. Plus, the fact that we can operate them without the usual catastrophes scares the heck out of the Outlanders. Weep! Scares the heck out of the Outlanders? For all of her direct speech, the woman didn't really explain things. I watched as she single-handedly lifted a bulky crate into the net. Up on the streamer, two long-haired, bearded crewmen gawked at the case with which the woman handled the heavy cargo. Weep! Anyway, she continued, not even breathing hard, and as if she had never left, loading them like this gets the point across. What point? That they better not mess with the Brotherhood or Recluce. What else? I shook my head. Think about it, young fellow. Sorry I can't talk longer, but the crates are coming up are going to take all my effort. Good luck. She was back at the third cart, the fourth and fifth carts since emptied of their crates. Weep. I was the one shaking my head as I walked toward the harbor wall from which the piers protruded. The wall stood another 3 cubits above the pier surface. Not really a defensive bulwark, but a physical barrier that declared to the sailors on the ships that Nylon was foreign territory. At the end of the second pier, a long schooner was tied, flying the ensign of Hammer from the rear staff. 2 armed guards stood by the plank to the ship. Half turned to face each other. From their posture, it was clear they were not guarding the ship against Recluce, but discouraging unplanned crew departures. I scrolled toward the third pier. Slowing as I saw the guard booth was manned. Tied to the pier were 3 long and low shapes that had to be ships, but ships like none I had ever seen. They were totally of black steel, with no masts, and only a low black superstructure beginning a third of the way back from the bow. Their bows were ragged and sharp, somehow shark-like. Each flew a single ensign from the jackstaff, a solid black flag. How had I missed them earlier, I didn't know. Except I could see what looked to be heat waves surrounding each. I shivered, even in the warm afternoon sunlight. Yes, the Brotherhood had ways to protect Recluce. Young fellow, this pier is closed. The guard in the booth wasn't that much older than I was, but he wore what was clearly a black uniform, and I could sense, rather than see, the sword and club. I just shrugged and turned away, looking down the pier again at the 3 strange ships. The guard watched me with a puzzled look on his face. Wasn't I supposed to see the ships? Had the heat waves been a shield of some sort? I glanced around the grassy space on the other side of the harbor walk. A scattering people sat on the few benches down opposite of the fourth pier. A meat vendor was selling sandwiches or something to the crew of the square rigger that was tied up. No one even glanced at the closed third pier. Shaking my head again, I began to walk back towards the market and toward my quarters, with more questions and fewer answers than when I had started. The bell was chiming as I crossed the grass toward the dining hall, and the blisters on my feet were burning.